When you peel back the pre-Columbian history of the United States, you might just find the Book of Mormon. Hidden in the Heartland. In the Book of Mormon, there are two specific instances where sea travel to the Promised Land became part of the story. In Ether chapter 6, the brother of Jared and his family travel the open ocean in approximately 2200 BC. A few hints on the whereabouts of their travel include the winds were furious, they avoided the monsters of the sea, and they traveled 344 days. In 1 Nephi chapter 17, after leaving Jerusalem and traveling east, Nephi was commanded to build a ship around 590 BC. In chapter 18, Nephi writes, "We did put forth into the sea, and were driven forth before the wind toward the promised land." The amount of time traveled was simply put, the space of many days. The mystery of ancient sea travel continues to amaze enthusiasts, especially when new evidence continues to make itself known.
And I'm finding stuff from 2500 BC to 10,000 years old on the same site.
In Ashland, Wisconsin, treasure hunter Scott Mitchen displays the large collection he's accumulated over the course of his time as a deep-sea diver in an old schoolhouse. The Great Lakes have become a treasure trove for artifacts that span from 100 to thousands of years old.
As you see, there's a lot of different artifacts in here, and it's treasures from all over the world. Some of the stuff in here is 4,500 years older than the pyramids of Egypt. Most of it's the Lake Superior region and Michigan.
The current narrative identifies Columbus as the first to cross the Atlantic Ocean and reach the American continent. But more and more evidence shows that other people visited America long before 1492. For example, the Vikings are known to have influence in the northeastern part of the United States and Canada. Evidence shows that around 1000 AD, there was a Norse settlement in Newfoundland that matches settlements found in Greenland and Iceland. But were there even earlier visitors to the New World? Archaeoastronomist Richard Moats gives his take on the evidence of how people might have traveled anciently to the New World.
Right in Israel is a place called Galilee. And in Galilee, the people there carry a haplogroup marker called haplogroup X DNA. And the concentration around Galilee is about 27%. The only other place in the world where you find a comparable concentration of haplogroup X DNA is in southeastern Canada, specifically around Nova Scotia, and that concentration is 27%. And when you track the DNA marker around the world, we see that it did not come across the Beringia land bridge, because there isn't hardly any or none in Russia. There's none or hardly any in Alaska. It came directly across the ocean. How did it get here? Ocean navigation.
The Bible gives a few examples of ships sailing to unnamed lands. The ships of Tarshish, for example, were known to bring back goods like gold, silver, iron, tin, and lead every 3 years. But from where? Regarding the possibility of trade coming from the New World, researcher Fritzzimmerman says much of the ancient resources in the United States could have made their way to the Middle East, including from the largest copper deposit located in northern Michigan.
There was migrations to North America as early as 3000, 2500 BC with the extraction of the copper up at Isle Royale. And I think it was the copper that was here, the best copper in the world was Isle Royale, was 99.9% pure. So copper culture, or we're looking at the Bronze Age, where copper was equivalent to gold. You couldn't get enough copper to make bronze. I always try to think of the financial aspect of people coming over here, and you can't dismiss that. Money drives people to do extraordinary things.
Another historical hint of ancient sea travel is in the Apocrypha, recalling the 10 tribes being carried away prisoners over the waters to a land where no man had dwelt. And ancient historian Josephus provided a hint that supports the story of the Jaredites. When commenting on the confounding of the languages during the Tower of Babel, he stated, "Each colony took possession of that land which they light upon, and unto which God led them. There were some also who passed over the sea in ships and inhabited the islands." In modern times, adventurers have challenged the status quo, such as Thor Heyerdahl. Possibly his most notable voyage was known as the Kontiki expedition in 1947. His goal was to demonstrate that ancient people could have made long sea voyages, explaining how early cultures could have migrated from one continent to another. With the Kontiki, Heyerdahl constructed a hand-built raft and traveled west 5,000 miles from South America to the Tuamotu Islands. Another such expedition was more recently accomplished by adventurer Philip Beale. In his book, Sailing Close to the Wind, Beale focuses on the ancient maritime trading culture known as the Phoenicians.
Well, I'm a Brit. I started off my career, I guess, as an adventurer, traveller, entered the Royal Navy. I sailed a couple of Her Majesty's ships, and then I decided that that wasn't quite enough adventure for me, so I wanted to get into and got into recreating the voyages of peoples migrating from one area to another area. When I was a 13-year-old, I had read the Thor Heyerdahl Kontiki expedition, so that was a huge inspiration for me, if you like. That was my initial inspiration. I had looked at who were the first people to trade with Africa and around Africa, and that's where the idea of recreating Herodotus's voyage around Africa came from.
History shows that the first to circumnavigate the continent of Africa was Portuguese explorer Bartolomeu Dias in 1488, only 4 years before the discovery of America by Columbus. Philipbeale's research of the Greek historian Herodotus led him to believe that long before Dias made this journey, it was conquered by the Phoenicians. About the time Lehi and his family were leaving Jerusalem in search of the Promised Land, the Phoenicians had become known as some of the best shipbuilders of that time, making them worthy candidates for extensive sea travel. They were also well known for trade, traveling to far-off places and returning with goods that were not indigenous to the Middle East.
A lot of the academics just said, well, it's ridiculous, you can't do this, because there is no blueprint, there is no vessel that we know about from 600 BC that was, Phoenician or from the Eastern Mediterranean. It just doesn't exist. And we spent 2 years looking at all the information, and then some Greek colleagues said, actually there is a vessel, and they said this vessel has been excavated by Professor Pommet, who is from Aix-en-Provence University. Him and his team excavated the Jules Verne 7, which was lying just off of Marseille, and he confirmed that it was indeed dated around 600 BC, and it was of Eastern Mediterranean origin. And he gave us access to all his research so that we could use what he had shown in terms of the design of the boat, how the timbers were joined together, and that's the information that we used to build the hull of the Phoenicia.
The Phoenicia became the name of the ship Philip desired to build. Researching the structure of the Jules Verne 7, Beale and his team spent 9 months constructing a ship to be as close as possible to that of what a Phoenician ship would have looked like in 600 BC, and sail safely around the entire body of Africa.
We knew, for example, that a primitive system of construction was available some 5,000 years ago with the Cheops ship, that is the funeral ship that was found in the Egyptian pyramids. But what the Phoenicians did was they didn't just have the pegging system, but they added the dowels, the mortise, and these are the tenons, if you like. And this is what the Romans called it, the Phoenician joint. So this is one of the great contributions that the Phoenicians made to shipbuilding, and enabled them to have the most robust hulls that could sail the oceans. So that gave them a tremendous trading advantage, that they had a robust hull, and they were the first people to have that.
Starting in Syria, Philip and his crew traveled for 2.5 years, circumnavigating the entire continent of Africa.
We'll have proven that it could sail around Africa without any problem in a Phoenician boat.
So, starting from Egypt and the Suez Canal. Then we went to Sudan, the Yemen, down to the Comoros Islands, Mozambique, South Africa, up to St. Helena and the Azores, which is obviously Portuguese, and then into Gibraltar and back to Carthage in Tunisia, Malta, Lebanon, and Syria. So yeah, we did quite an incredible tour of Africa and the Middle East.
After sailing around the Cape of Good Hope and then heading north in the Atlantic, something interesting happened. The natural winds were sending the Phoenicia straight for the United States.
When we crossed the equator, if we'd have just followed the winds at that point, we would have ended up somewhere between the Dominican Republic and Florida, sort of section, the Gulf of Mexico, but it would have been in that region somewhere.
As the Phoenicia reached a mere few hundred miles away from the coast of Florida, the crew fueled another debate. Did the Phoenicians reach America 2,000 years before Columbus? This idea was sparked by another stop along the way, the Azores Islands.
The Azores is an amazing, collection of islands, some 900 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean. The prevailing winds and currents come from the west. So if you're sailing there in an ancient ship that you can really only sail downwind, you'd have to go all the way around to get to the Azores. The likelihood is that ancient sailors, Carthaginians, may well have got to America on the return journey would have discovered the Azores. Some 200 years ago, a pot of Carthaginian coins was found there, and this pot of coins was partly taken to the King of Spain, and it ended up with a Swedish coin collector. This whole thing, to me, indicates that the ancients were far more active in the Atlantic than we give them credit for before Christian times.
And as far as the Book of Mormon goes, could this have been the path that Lehi and his family took in 600 BC?
We had no idea that Lehi had, probably started his voyage from Oman. We were doing this as an experimental archaeological project. After the voyage, that we realized that actually what we had done was to, in a way, create part of Lehi's voyage to the New World. I had no understanding, to be honest, of the Church of the Latter-day Saints and their interest in this project right until the end. During the voyage across the Atlantic, I got an email from one of the former members of the crew who was a Mormon saying, "Look, for goodness sake, just land in America and make our day, and then go on, and that was the first time that I realized there was something like I hadn't appreciated, the impact that we were having."
At the time of this recording, Philip Beale was about to embark on a second journey with the Phoenicia. This time he intends to explore the burning question, was it possible for Phoenicians to explore America all those years ago?
So this next expedition, which is the Phoenicians before Columbus expedition, we're going to start from Carthage in Tunisia, which was if you like, the home of the Phoenicians in the Western Mediterranean. They were the dominant power there. They were trading metals and goods and bringing in fish from the Atlantic. So it's right that we start the expedition there in September, and we're going to sail out of the Straits of Gibraltar and into the Atlantic, and we're going to go down the coast of Morocco and across to the Canary Islands, and then we're going to do this experiment and just see where this Phoenician ship is going to end up, and where if they left from the Canary Islands. And we know that the Phoenicians traded goods with the Canary Islands, where a ship like this would end up in the New World.
So while written history continues to stand by the notion that Columbus was the first European to cross the Atlantic and discover America, others continue to challenge the status quo.
Quite a few people along the way said, you know, you're risking too much here. This is crazy. But I pointed out to them that, you know, the ancient people were more in touch with the weather and the conditions, and they would have chosen the right time to sail, and, you know, that's where you can reduce the risk of these adventures.